There were many birds around her. They were flying or walking or eating something. Mary Poppins didn't like them. She always called them sparrows. But they were not sparrows. They were pigeons. There were gray pigeons like grandmothers, and brown pigeons like uncles, and gray-green, noisy pigeons like fathers, and the silly, soft blue pigeons were like mothers. That's what Jane and Michael thought about them. They flew round and round the head of the bird woman, and when the children came up to her, they suddenly flew away and sat on the top of St. Paul's, laughing and looking down. It was Michael's turn to buy a bag. Jane bought one the day before. He came up to the bird woman and gave her money. "Feed the birds, 2pence a bag," said the bird woman, and she put a bag of crumbs into his hand. Michael knew it was no good asking her any questions. He and Jane often tried, but she always said, "Feed the birds, 2pence a bag," and nothing more. Just as a cuckoo can only say cuckoo, no matter what questions you ask it. Jane and Michael and Mary Poppins spread the crumbs in a circle on the ground, and one by one, the birds came down from St. Paul's. The birds were eating the crumbs and making a great noise. They left no crumbs on the ground, because it is not polite for a pigeon to leave anything on the plate. When the meal was finished, the birds flew up and went flying round and round the bird woman's head. One of them sat on her hat and looked like a hat decoration, and one bird sat on Mary Poppins's hat and took a flower off it. Mary Poppins got very angry and shook an umbrella at the bird. "I'll put you in a pie," said Mary Poppins. Then she called to Jane and Michael. "It is time to go," she said. "Goodbye," said Jane and Michael to the bird woman. "Feed the birds," she replied, smiling. They left her, walking with Mary Poppins between them. "What happens when everybody goes away?" said Michael to Jane. He knew well what happened, but asked Jane because it was her story. "At night, when everybody goes to bed," began Jane, "all the birds come down from the top of St. Paul's and run very carefully all over the ground just to see there are no crumbs left. And when—" "You've forgotten the baths." "Oh, yes, they have a bath and clean their wings. And when they fly 3 times round the head of the bird woman, do they sit on her shoulders?" "Yes, and on her hat, and some on her knee. Then she looks at them and smiles at them and tells them to be good birds." "In the bird language?" "Yes. And when they are all sleepy and it is time to go to sleep, she spreads out her skirts as a mother hen spreads out her wings, and the birds go under the skirts, and they sleep there till morning." Michael looked at his sister happily. He loved the story and was never tired of hearing it. "And it's all true, isn't it?" he said, just as he always did. "No," said Mary Poppins, who always said no. "Yes," said Jane, who always knew everything. Chapter 8. Mrs. Corey. "Now we are going to buy some gingerbread," said Mary Poppins to the children. They were doing shopping that morning. The next moment Mary Poppins turned the corner and suddenly stopped. Jane and Michael saw a strange shop. It was very small and very dark. There was a small dark door between the windows, and through it Mary Poppins, Jane, and Michael came in. There wasn't any lamp inside. The golden light came from paper stars lying all around the shop. They were gingerbread decorations. Mysterious. That's the right word for that shop. "Fanny, Annie, where are you?" Mary Poppins called. And the next moment 2 of the largest people in the world appeared and shook hands with Mary Poppins and the children. "What's this? What's this?" A high, thin little voice came from the back of the shop. The next moment, Fanny and Annie became frightened. "What's going on?" cried the voice. And the woman appeared. She was as small and thin as her voice. She looked very old with thin hair and a little face, but she ran up to them as quickly as a young girl. "Mary Poppins, with John and Barbara. What? Jane and Michael too? I haven't been so surprised since Christopher Columbus discovered America." She smiled at the twins so nicely that they stopped crying and began to laugh. "That's better," she said, and then she did a very strange thing. She broke off 2 of her fingers and gave them to John and Barbara, and the strangest thing was that the next moment she had 2 new fingers on her hand. Jane and Michael saw it. "What a pity," Michael said. "They aren't chocolate." "Well, they are sometimes," said Mrs. Corey. "I often eat them if I can't sleep at night. I think, my dear," she turned to Mary Poppins, "I think you want some gingerbread." "Now, my darlings," said Mrs. Corey in a soft voice and smiled sweetly at Jane and Michael. "Won't you come and take some? It's very special today." "How many?" "4 each," said Mary Poppins. "That's 12. 1 dozen." "I'll make it a baker's dozen. Take 13, said Mrs. Corey. So Jane and Michael chose 13 bars of gingerbread, each with a golden paper star. Michael tried one of them. "Good?" asked Mrs. Corey, and then she cried in her thin voice, "Hooray! Hooray!" Then she stopped and her face grew serious. "But remember, you must pay." Mary Poppins opened her bag and took out 3 coins. She gave them to Jane and Michael. "Now," said Mrs. Corey, "stick the coins on my coat. They won't come off." Mary Poppins was the first to stick her coin on the Mrs. Corey's coat, and it stuck. Then Jane and Michael put theirs on, Jane's on the right shoulder and Michael's on the left one. "How strange," said Jane. "I'm afraid we must be off now, Mrs. Corey," said Mary Poppins. "Well, my dear Miss Poppins, it has been a very pleasant visit, and you'll come again soon, won't you, with Jane and Michael and the twins?" They nodded. Then Mrs. Corey came closer to the children with a curious look on her face. "I wonder," she said, "what you will do with the paper stars." "Oh, we'll keep them," said Jane. "We always do." "Ah, you keep them. And I wonder where you keep them." "Well," Jane began, "my paper stars are all in the box under the table, and my stars are in a shoebox on the first shelf of the wardrobe," said Michael. "Box under the table and shoebox in the wardrobe," said Mrs. Corey, and looked at Mary Poppins. You could see some secret passed between them. "Well," said Mrs. Corey, "that is very interesting. And now goodbye." Suddenly, Jane and Michael found themselves outside. They turned and didn't see the shop. "How strange," said Jane, "but the gingerbread is very good." And they were so busy eating their gingerbread that they forgot how very strange it was. They remembered it again that night when they were in bed. "Jane," called Michael, "I can hear someone coming up the stairs." The door opened and somebody came into the room. It was Mary Poppins. She moved about the room softly, with quick, secret movements. First she took Jane's box, opened it, and shut it quickly. Then she opened the wardrobe and took something out. Then she went out. In the garden, somebody was speaking in a low voice. There were some people there. Jane and Michael got out of bed and came up to the window. They saw a little figure and 2 gigantic ones near their gate. "Mrs. Corey with Fanny and Annie," said Jane. Fanny had 2 long ladders on her shoulder, and Annie had a large pail of something that looked like glue and a large brush. Then the front door opened, and Mary Poppins came to meet them. She had a basket on her arm, and in the basket there was something. It gave out a soft, mysterious light. "Come on, we must hurry. We haven't much time," said Mrs. Corey. Jane and Michael saw them go down Cherry Tree Lane, and then they turned to the left and went up the hill. When they got to the top of the hill, where there were no houses but only grass and flowers, they stopped. "What are they going to do?" asked Michael. But there was no need for Jane to answer because they could see what was happening. Annie and Fanny fixed the ladder with its one end on the ground and the other in the sky. Mrs. Corey took the brush and the pail of glue and climbed the ladder. Mary Poppins with her basket climbed the other ladder. Then the most surprising thing happened. Mrs. Corey started covering the sky with the glue, and Mary Poppins took something shiny from her basket and fixed it to the glue. She was sticking the gingerbread stars to the sky. They understood it when she took her hand away. When the star was placed on the sky, it began to shine brightly. "They are our stars," said Michael. At last it was over. Then Mary Poppins and Mrs. Corey came down and started their way back. Jane and Michael looked at each other. Then without a word, they went to their boxes where they usually kept the paper stars. They were empty. "But why? But why?" said Michael, looking surprisingly at his sister. Jane said nothing. She thought and thought and thought. "What I want to know," she said, "is this. Are the stars made of gold paper, or is the gold made of paper stars?" But there was no answer. Chapter 9. John and Barbara's Story. One day Jane and Michael were out at a party. Mrs. Banks was on the sofa with her feet up and Mary Poppins was making the room. The twins, John and Barbara, were in their beds. "Oh, go away. You're in my eyes," said John in a loud voice. "Sorry," said the sunlight. "I must move from east to west in a day. Sorry. Shut your eyes and you won't see me." The golden sunlight went across the room as quick as it could because it didn't want to trouble John. "How soft, how sweet you are." "I love you," said Barbara to the sunlight. "Talking, talking. What a noisy place. There's always somebody talking in this room," said a voice at the window. John and Barbara looked up. It was the blackbird. "I like that," said Mary Poppins. "And what about you? All day long, non-stop talking. You are worse than any sparrow, and that's the truth." The blackbird looked at Mary Poppins. "Well," he said, "consultations, discussions, arguments, disputes. That is my work." "Work," said John, laughing. "And I wasn't talking to you, young man," said the blackbird. "I heard you talking for some hours last Saturday. Well, I thought you would never stop. I couldn't sleep all night." "That wasn't talking," said John. I had a pain." But the blackbirds didn't listen to him. "Well, Barbara, have you got anything for me today?" "There's the half of a biscuit," she said. The blackbird took the biscuit and began to eat it. "Thank you," said Mary Poppins, but he was too busy eating the biscuit. "I said thank you," said Mary Poppins a little louder. The blackbird looked up. What? Oh, I'm sorry. I've no time for such useless words." And he finished his biscuit. The room was very quiet. John put his right foot into his mouth. "Why are you doing that?" said Barbara in her soft voice. "There's nobody to see you." "I know," said John, "but I like to keep in practice. The grown-ups like my trick so much." "They liked my trick too," said Barbara. "Yesterday I took off my socks, and she said I was so sweet that she would like to eat me. She really wanted to eat me, didn't she?" "No, it's only the idiotic way they talk," said John. "I don't believe I'll ever understand them. They are so stupid. And even Jane and Michael are stupid sometimes." "Yes," agreed Barbara, taking off her socks and putting them on again. "Well," John went on, "they don't understand anything we say. They don't understand what other things say. Last Monday, Jane said that she didn't understand the language of the wind." "I know," said Barbara. "Michael thinks that the blackbird says, 'wee twee.' He doesn't know that the blackbird speaks English." "They knew once," said Mary Poppins. "What?" said John and Barbara together. "Really, they understood the bird and the wind and the language of the sunlight and the stars. Of course they did. Once. But why have they forgotten it all?" asked John. "Because they've grown older," explained Mary Poppins. "Barbara, put on your socks at once, please." "How silly they are. I shall never forget it when I grow up," said John. "Nor I," said Barbara. "Yes, you will," said Mary Poppins. "We won't," said the twins. But the blackbird laughed. "I say you will. You'll forget, because everybody forgets. There never was a boy or a girl except, of course, her." And he looked at Mary Poppins. "But why can she remember?" said John. "She's different," said the blackbird. "She's something special, you see." The sunlight moved on through the room. Outside, a light wind was blowing among the cherry trees in the lane. "Listen, the wind's talking," said John. "We won't hear that, Mary Poppins?" "You'll hear," said Mary Poppins, "but you won't understand. It's how things happen." Now John and Barbara were crying loudly. The door opened and Mrs. Banks came in. "Oh, my sweets, what is it? Why are they crying, Mary Poppins?" "I think they're getting their teeth," said Mary Poppins. "Oh, of course," said Mrs. Banks happily. "I don't want teeth. I will forget all the things I like," cried John. "And I don't want any teeth," cried Barbara. Mrs. Banks was saying sweet words to her babies, and John stopped crying. He didn't want his mother to be sad. So he stopped crying and gave her a lovely smile. Then Jane stopped crying too. Mother gave them a kiss and left the room. That moment, Mary Poppins smiled a secret smile. "Just listen to them," said the blackbird. "They think they will remember. In a month or two, their teeth will grow, they will be 1 year old, and they will forget. They won't even know my name, silly children. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha." And he flew away through the window. At last the teeth came through, and the twins had their first birthday. Next day the blackbird came back. "Hello, here we are again," he said happily. "Well, Barbara," he began in his soft voice, "anything for the old friend today?" "Baloo, Baloo, Baloo," said Barbara, finishing her last biscuit. "What's my name? What's my name? What's my name?" cried the blackbird in a loud voice. Umph," said John. The blackbird understood everything. "So, it's happened," he said quietly to Mary Poppins. She nodded. "Oh, well, I knew it. But they didn't believe it. I shall miss them." And he was gone. Chapter 10. Full Moon. "I wonder what happens in the zoo at night," asked Michael. "Care killed a cat," said Mary Poppins angrily, and sent the children to their beds. Next moment she went away as fast as the wind. Suddenly the children heard a voice. "Put on some clothes, quick." They dressed and opened the door. There was nobody there, but they heard something going down the stairs. Jane and Michael followed. "Quick," said the voice, and they followed it down streets. Finally, they were in front of the gate. "Look!" Jane cried. "It's the zoo!" "Welcome," said a big brown bear. "No money. Here's your ticket." "But we usually give tickets," said Jane. "Tonight you get them," said the bear and smiled. Michael looked at the bear. "I remember you. Once I gave you a tin of syrup." "You did," said the bear. "But you forgot to open it. Be more careful next time." "Are you always out at night?" said Michael. "No, only when the birthday falls on a full moon." Jane and Michael came into the zoo. The full moon was up in the sky, so bright that the children could see every tree, every flower, and every cage, too. Zoo animals were out of cages. Suddenly, 2 wolves ran past the children, talking to a very tall stork. In the distance, a tiger and a parrot were talking. Near the elephant house, a fat old gentleman was walking up and down on his knees, and on his back there were 8 little monkeys. They were having a nice time, laughing and talking. Suddenly they heard an angry voice. "Come on, let's see how you dive for orange." There was a pool of water near them, and the voice came from it. It was a small black seal. But we can't swim," said Michael. "Really? Why didn't you learn to swim when you were little? Nobody is interested if I can swim or not." Suddenly they saw a big lion. "Oh," he began, "I can show you the way. Come quickly. It is beginning." At last they came up to the big cat house. Inside, there were a lot of animals. There were panthers and leopards, wolves, tigers and antelopes, monkeys, goats and giraffes. "Fantastic, isn't it?" said the lion proudly. "Just like the dear old jungle days." "Look, the cages are full of people," said Michael, and his mouth fell open. In one cage, 2 gentlemen in hats were standing and waiting for something. Children of all ages were playing in another cage. The animals outside watched them with great interest. Then there were 3 old ladies in raincoats in another cage. One of ladies was knitting, but the other 2 were standing and shouting at the animals. "Terrible animals! Go away! I want my tea!" "But how did they all get in there?" Jane asked the lion. "Lost," said the lion. "We had to put them somewhere for a night. Some are very dangerous. Don't go near them. Look, the zookeeper is going to feed them." Jane and Michael saw 4 brown bears coming to the cage. They opened a small door in each cage and pushed the food inside. There were bottles of milk for babies, cakes for children, cheese sandwiches for the old ladies, meatballs for gentlemen. "Well, that's the end. I'm afraid we must go. You mustn't be late. It's her birthday." They left the big cat house and soon stopped near another small house. The lion opened the door and pushed the 2 children inside. It was the snake house. All the cages were open and the snakes were out. And in the middle of the hall, the children saw Mary Poppins. Jane and Michael could hardly believe their eyes. Suddenly they heard a hissing voice. "My dear child." The king cobra was coming to Mary Poppins. It is long since your birthday fell on a full moon." He turned his head to Jane and Michael. "And who are these?" he said in his soft voice, looking at the children. "Jane and Michael Banks," said Mary Poppins. "My friends." "Then they are welcome," Jane said in a low voice. "He talks as though he were a great lord. He is. He's the lord of our world, the cleverest and most terrible of us all," said the lion. The king cobra smiled, a long, slow, secret smile, and turned to Mary Poppins. "Cousin," hissed the king cobra, "I am going to give you my own skin. It is a small present, dear Mary, but it may serve for a belt or a pair of shoes. These things are always useful, you know." And the king cobra started to move slowly from side to side. Suddenly he gave a long jump, and his golden skin fell on the floor, and in its place he had a new coat of shining silver. "I will write some nice words on it," said the king cobra. And he wrote something with his tail on the skin. "Thank you very much. It's so kind of you." Mary Poppins was very pleased to get such a wonderful present. "Listen," the king cobra said. "It is time for the great dance. You must be off. Goodbye till your next birthday." Mary Poppins, Jane, Michael, and all the snakes went out. The children could hear the animals singing and shouting. They saw leopards and lions, camels, bears, parrots, antelopes standing around Mary Poppins. Then the animals began to move, wildly crying their jungle songs and dancing their wild jungle dances. Jane and Michael watched the dance. Their friend the lion was dancing with a zebra, a wolf was dancing with a rabbit, a tiger with an antelope. "I thought, sir," Jane said to the king cobra, "that lions and birds and tigers and little animals are natural enemies." "You are right, but not on the birthday," said the king cobra. "Tonight the small are free from the great, and the great protect the small. Even I can meet a goose without any thought of dinner." Birds and animals were now dancing together, round and round Mary Popping. The trees were moving their branches, and the full moon was also dancing high up in the sky. Jane and Michael felt that soft light fell on their faces. "They are sleeping and dreaming," said a soft voice. Was it the voice of the king cobra or their mother's voice? Jane and Michael could not tell. "I had such a strange dream last night," said Jane in the morning. "Dreamt we were at the zoo and it was Mary Poppins' birthday, and animals were out of the cages but the people were inside them." "That's my dream," said Michael, looking very surprised. "We couldn't have the same dreams," said Jane. "Are you sure?" "Do you remember the lion and the seal?" said Michael. "Of course I do. And the babies inside the cage, and the king cobra." "Then it wasn't a dream at all," said Jane. It was true. "Mary Poppins," she said, "were you at the zoo last night?" "At the zoo? In the middle of the night? I have a zoo in this nursery, thank you," said Mary Poppins. "Hyenas and orang-utans, all of you, sit up straight, and no more stupid talk." "Then it was a dream," Jane said. But Michael was looking with his mouth open at Mary Poppins. "Jane," he said. "Jane, look." And Jane saw what he was looking at. Mary Poppins was wearing a belt made of golden snake skin, and on it there were words, "A present from the zoo." Chapter 11. Christmas Shopping. It was Christmas time, and Mary Poppins, Jane, and Michael were going to the largest shop to do their Christmas shopping. Shop windows were full of toys and books and plum cakes. "Look, airplanes," said Michael. "Two little black babies. Are they chocolate?" asked Jane. "Now we will go in," Mary Poppins said to Jane and Michael. It wasn't easy to choose the presents for all the family. "That will be for Daddy," said Michael, and took a toy train with special signals. "I will take care of it for him when he goes to the city." "I think I will get this for Mother," said Jane, and took a small doll's pram, which her mother always wanted. "Perhaps she will give it to me sometimes." After that, Michael chose a packet of hairpins for the twins and a Meccano set for his mother. Jane bought Robinson Crusoe for the twins to read when they grew up. "Now I can read it myself," she said. "I am sure they will give it to me." At last Mary Poppins said, "And it is time to go home." "Just 5 minutes longer?" asked Jane. But Mary Poppins said, "No," and the children had to go with her. Behind them, the dolls on the Christmas tree were saying, "Take me home, somebody!" And the airplanes were all trying to fly. "Let me fly! Ah, do let me fly!" Jane and Michael hurried away, closing their ears to those voices. The time in the toy department was very short, and when they were going to open the shop door, they saw a running girl. "Look," said Jane and Michael both together. "Oh dear," said Mary Poppins surprisingly. The girl had few clothes on. Suddenly she stopped and looked around. The girl was looking for someone. Then she saw Jane, Michael, and Mary Poppins. "Ah, there you are. Thank you for waiting. I'm afraid I'm a little late. Aren't you glad to see me?" "Yes," said Jane, smiling. "But who are you?" "Who am I? Don't say you don't know me." The child looked very surprised, and then she turned to Mary Poppins. "She knows me, don't you? I'm sure you know me." There was a curious look on Mary Poppins' face. "Does it begin with an M?" "Of course it does. I'm Maya. I'm the second of the Pleiades. Electra, she's the eldest, couldn't come because she's looking after Merope, the baby. Oh, Jane. Oh, Michael. I've often watched you from the sky, and now I'm actually talking to you. There is nothing about you I don't know. Michael doesn't like to brush his hair, and your father has got thin hair on the top. I like him. It was he who first introduced us. Don't you remember? He said one evening last summer, 'Look, there are the Pleiades, 7 stars altogether, the smallest in the sky. But there is one of them you can't see.' He meant Merope, of course. She's still too young to stay up all night. She's such a baby that she has to go to bed very early. Some of them up there call us the Little Sisters." "But what are you doing here?" asked Michael, still very surprised. "I've come down to buy toys for them all. We can't get away very often, you know. We're so busy making the spring rains. Can you help me?" she said, and took the children back to the toy department. As they went, the people stood and looked at them and dropped their bags. "Just look at her. She is so cold. What are her parents thinking of?" But Jane, Michael, Mary Poppins, and Maya were very busy with shopping and didn't look around. "Here we are," said Maya. "What shall we buy? I want something for each of my sisters. 6 of them. First, my eldest sister. She's very domestic. What about that nice broom? We have so many troubles with stardust. Now for Tegeti. She likes dancing. Don't you think, Jane, a skipping rope would be just the thing for her? Then there's Alcyone. She's so quiet. Does she want anything? A book, do you think, Mary Poppins? I hope she would like that nice little book. And if she doesn't, she can look at the pictures. I know what Selena wants. A hoop. She will like morning exercises with it up there in the sky. She'll love that red and blue one. Michael, what would you advise for Sterope? What about a top? Said Michael. What a good idea. She will love to watch it turning round and round in the sky. And what do you think for Merope the baby, Jane? John and Barbara, said Jane, have rubber ducks. Oh, Jane, how clever you are. A rubber duck for Merope, please. A blue one with yellow eyes. Then Michael turned and said to Mary Poppins, But who will pay for the toys? What did you say? Asked Maya with round, surprised eyes. Nobody will pay. There is nothing to pay, is there? Nothing at all, madam, the shop assistant said, and gave her the bag full of toys. Now we must go, she went on, taking Michael's arm. We must all go home. It's very late, and I heard your mother telling you that you must be home in time for tea. Besides, I must get back too. Come. And she led the way through the shop and out. Outside the shop, Jane suddenly said, But there's no present for her. She's bought something for all the others and nothing for herself. Maya has no Christmas present. Mary Poppins gave a quick look into the shop window. She saw herself, very nicely dressed, with her hat and her new gloves on. Then she took off her new gloves and put them on to Maya's hands. There, she said, it's cold today. Maya looked at the gloves. They were too big for her little hands. She said nothing, but came up to Mary Poppins and kissed her. I've been so happy, said Maya. Don't forget me, will you? The children shook their heads. Goodbye, said Maya. She stood on tiptoe, lifted up her arms, and jumped into the air. She began to walk the air up and up, climbing higher and higher. You could think there were stairs in the gray sky. What on earth is happening? Somebody asked. But it's not possible, said another voice. A lot of people were standing with their heads up and looking at the girl in the sky. Suddenly they heard the voice of the policeman. What is this? What is going on here? He looked up and called angrily. There! Come down! What are you doing up there? Come down! We can't have the girl walking through the air. It's not natural. But Maya was going up and up. Then a cloud hit her, but they knew she was behind it. The bright light was coming through the dark cloud. When Jane, Michael, and Mary Poppins came home and the children told their story to their mother, she said, Perhaps. You know, at Christmas time, strange things happen. But what about Mary Poppins' gloves? Said Jane. We saw her give the gloves to Maya, and she's not wearing them now. What, Mary Poppins? Said Mrs. Banks. Your best gloves. You gave them away. Mary Poppins said in her usual cold voice, My gloves are my gloves, and I do with them what I like. Chapter 12. The West Wind. It was the first day of spring. Jane and Michael knew it at once because they heard Mr. Banks singing in the bathroom, and there was only one day in the year when he did that. Then he went out into the garden and smelled the air. I think it is the west wind. It's warm today, he said. Did you hear what he said? Michael took Jane's arm. It is the west wind, she said slowly. They didn't say a word, but they had the same thought. They forgot it soon, because everything was fine that morning. But trouble began after lunch. Jane was in the garden. Michael ran out of the house, very red in the face. "Look, Jane, look!" he cried. In his hand he had Mary Poppins' compass. "The compass?" said Jane. Michael suddenly started crying. "She gave it to me. Oh, there must be something wrong. What is going to happen? She has never given me anything before." That afternoon, Mary Poppins was very kind. She was thinking about something. At last Michael asked her, "Oh, do be cross, Mary Poppins. Do be cross again. It is not like you." "Trouble, trouble, and it will trouble you," said Mary Poppins crossly in her usual voice. And the same moment he felt a little better. "Perhaps it's only a feeling," he said to Jane. "Perhaps," said Jane slowly. The wind grew stronger and stronger. They could hear it everywhere inside the house, down the chimneys and near the windows, even in the nursery. Mary Poppins gave them their supper and took away the plates after it. "There," she said. Then she put one hand on Michael's head and the other on Jane's shoulder. "Now," she said, "I am just going off for a few minutes." She went out and shut the door quietly behind her. They wanted to run after her, but something stopped them. They were waiting for her to come back. "How silly we are," said Jane. "Everything's all right." But she knew it was not true. They still sat there at the table, waiting. At last Michael said, "She's been gone a very long time, hasn't she?" But there was no answer. Suddenly they heard somebody shut the front door. "Michael!" said Jane, jumping up. "Jane!" said Michael, with a white look on his face. They ran quickly to the window and looked out. Down stood Mary Poppins, dressed in her coat and hat, with her carpet bag in one hand and her umbrella in the other. The wind was blowing wildly about her. She smiled at the wind and opened the umbrella. The wind got under the umbrella and lifted Mary Poppins from the ground. Then it lifted her over the front gate and carried her over the cherry trees in the lane. "She's going, Jane, she's going," cried Michael. Jane and Michael opened the window and cried, "Mary Poppins! Mary Poppins, come back!" But she did not hear them. She went up into the air. At last she was over the hill, and the children couldn't see her. "I wonder if we'll ever see her again," said Jane, and started to take off her clothes because it was time to go to sleep. "What is this under my pillow?" It was a small parcel there. When Jane opened it, she cried, "It's her picture," she said, and it was. Under it was written, "Mary Poppins by Bert." Jane saw that there was a letter in the parcel, too. It said, "Dear Jane, Michael had the compass, so the picture is for you. Au revoir, Mary Poppins." Jane didn't understand the last word, so she asked Michael, "What does au revoir mean in English?" "Au revoir? I think it means to meet again." Jane and Michael looked at each other. Happiness shone in their eyes. They knew what Mary Poppins meant. "That's all right," Michael said. "She always does what she says she will."